right. Well, hello, I'm Kari. Thank you all for coming. We've been doing a lot of work this summer, so we really appreciate it. But I've been working at the Port of Newport with my mentor, Aaron Gretz, on a project related to economic development. So the Port of Newport operates a commercial marina as well as a recreational marina, but they also have an international shipping terminal, so where goods can come in, be imported. It's one of only 3 deep drop terminals on the Oregon coast, so pretty good opportunity to bring in cargo. And right now they don't bring in a ton of cargo really at all, but the way that my mentors described it to me is cargo can basically be night and day in terms of the revenue that it can generate for a port. Just a little bit more on that. So marine cargo activity does generate a lot of revenue just in general, and it's actually a pretty sustainable method of logistics. So it uses a lot less, it uses a lot less energy than just trucking things across the country. So cargo is really, really important for the port. And if the port were able to generate more revenue from cargo, it would not only be able to invest into some infrastructure projects that would be really important, but also just keep costs pretty low for all the commercial fishermen that use the marina. So the goal of my project was to figure out a raw material that could be imported to that international terminal and then manufactured at a facility on some adjacent port-owned property right next to it. So they want to build a manufacturing facility there. And the big purpose of that is to create living wage jobs through manufacturing to support economic development in the area. A little bit about Newport. So median gross rent is just over $1,000 a month. Median household income is just below $55,000. And then population with a bachelor's degree or higher is 30.2%. These were really important statistics for me because I wanted to pick an industry that would support jobs that have high enough wages for people to afford to live here, but also you don't need a PhD to do all of the jobs. I also looked at MIT's cost of living calculator because I think it's a really comprehensive way of looking at affordability. So it accounts for not just the price of housing, but also things like education, transportation, other utilities, childcare, all that good stuff. So I aim to have my annual mean wage at just above $45,000, where I have it bolded right there. So in order to kind of evaluate different industries, I wanted to use some standard criteria. So I developed this little set. So manufacturing capacity, basically just what the port can actually do. The feasibility for industry development, looking at employment projection and just employment growth over the last decade. I also looked at workforce characteristics like the education requirements and then the mean wages as compared to the cost of living like I was talking about. I also wanted to look at environmental sustainability, so the impact of a material on the environment, as well as the manufacturing process to turn it into an end product. And then finally, I looked at the local and regional considerations. So I wanted to look at the existing industries here, as well as any niches that could be filled by the port. So the first industry that I looked at is called mass timber. So mass timber is a building system that uses pieces of wood that are laminated together using adhesive, glue, or like dowels, nails, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of an emerging thing in the building industry. But this photo on the right here is from the Portland International Airport, where they've been rebuilding their terminal and they've been using mass timber to do it. So it's pretty cool. For mass timber, it all starts with sustainable forest management. You might not think of logging as kind of a sustainable industry, but it does have sustainability aspects to it, such as kind of reducing wildfire risk. But basically, the lumber is sent to a sawmill where it is cut down to a specific size. It then has to be dried in a kiln because the lumber that's used for mass timber products have a very low moisture content. After that, it's manufactured. There's a couple of different mass timber products. There's mass plywood, cross-laminated timber, and glulam. And then after that, it has to be fabricated. So it has to be kind of cut down to specific sizes or have some components added before it can be used in a construction project. In terms of its industry growth, it is seeing a little bit of growth. There's a 14% growth between 2014 and 2024. And the employment projections do show growth in most wood product manufacturing, with the big caveat being that there has been a large decrease in logging over the past few decades, and then there have been a lot of sawmill closures in the last few years as well. In terms of its mean wages, it doesn't have the highest wages. All occupations right there is more general statistics. So those are above the cost of living calculation that I used. But the production occupations, which I would assume would be most of the manufacturers, are a little bit on the lower end. In terms of the educational requirements, to work at a sawmill, it doesn't take more than usually a high school diploma with some training. but manufacturing and fabrication is a lot more automated. So it takes those kind of machining skills that you can get with an advanced degree or certification. But one really cool thing that I learned throughout this project is that OSU is actually designated the Mass Timber Tech Hub. So there is a lot of innovation and research going on there. And OSU has partnered with U of O and a couple of other organizations as part of this Tallwood Design Institute, where they're doing a lot of research on mass timber and how it can be used, how it can be made better. And a little bit about sustainability, I focus a lot on this idea of embodied carbon, which is a more holistic way of looking at the carbon footprint of a building material and its uses. So it accounts for not only making that material, but then turning it into the final product. And mass timber has a lower embodied carbon than other building materials like concrete and steel. And these wooden structures can also store carbon from going into the atmosphere, which I thought was really interesting. In terms of the existing industry here in Oregon, most of the major companies are centered around Portland and I-5. And the Port of Portland actually has a big manufacturing facility going in. It's kind of in the works right now, but they're going to be making prefabricated homes like you can see in that photo on the left. And that was an important factor for me in this project because if the Port of Portland already has some kind of a mass timber project going on, it might not make sense to have the same thing going on here as well. The location quotient is an interesting calculation. It's essentially a ratio that represents if an industry is more advantageous in one state as compared to other places in the US. So I looked at coastal Oregon specifically, and out of these 10 industries, the highest location quotients, there are 6 out of those 10 for coastal Oregon that have to do with logging or forestry or wood manufacturing. So it would be pretty advantageous to have it specifically on the coast. In terms of any niches that could be filled by the port, a sawmill and a dry kiln could be a really good option because of those specifications for mass timber in terms of their size and the moisture content that they need. And from a conversation that I had with someone from the Oregon Department of Forestry, I basically found out that there isn't a sawmill that's dedicated to mass timber manufacturing. So this could be a good opportunity for the port to operate one of those. Another good opportunity could be to have a fabrication facility because most of these mass timber products, after they're manufactured, they can't just be used as a standard product. They need to be cut down or have components added to them, which creates a sort of bottleneck for manufacturers. So you could have a fabrication facility that could basically alleviate that bottleneck by making custom-made products. So the next industry that I looked at is food manufacturing, which is basically turning raw food commodities into intermediate or end-use products. There's a lot of different subsectors within food manufacturing, but I wanted to focus on these 3 specifically. So grain and oilseed milling, fruit and vegetable preserving and specialty food manufacturing, and then seafood product and packaging. For fruit and vegetable preserving, you can basically have fresh or frozen products that just need washing and then packaging, but you can also do some preservation like canning, pickling, or drying. For grain and oilseed milling, it's basically turning, I focus a little bit more on the grain side, but you could use grains like wheat or corn or barley and mill them into things like flour or meal to be used as an intermediate product. And then for seafood product packaging and processing, there's already a little bit of that or a lot of that goes on in Newport because commercial fishing is such a big part of the economy here. But it's things like filleting, washing, canning, all that kind of stuff. In terms of the port's infrastructure, any kind of food manufacturing does use a lot of water and it creates a lot of wastewater, which is already an issue for the seafood processors here. And so if the port were to take on some kind of a food manufacturing facility, it would need to do a pretty big infrastructure project just to get that wastewater treatment in there. In terms of the wages for food manufacturing, they are higher than mass timber, but you will notice that seafood packaging and processing is a little bit on the lower end. In terms of the educational requirements, kind of like mass timber, it's a very automated industry. It uses a lot of machinery, so it would take people that are skilled in those or that can kind of gain the skills to do those kinds of jobs. Like I was kind of talking about, it does use a lot of water and there's a lot of waste that's produced specifically from grain milling. And there's a lot of organic water pollutants that are created from grain milling specifically. But the cool thing that I learned through this project is that a lot of those byproducts can actually be turned into other kinds of products like biofuels and fertilizers. So there is a bit of a sustainability aspect to it there. In comparison to other states in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon also does have a big advantage with food manufacturing. And I think that's mostly in part because of our big agricultural presence here. But that is just kind of one reason why it might be more advantageous to do food manufacturing here. In terms of the existing industry here in Newport, it's not a huge industry, but there are a lot of like restaurants here. There's a lot of commercial fishing that goes on, and breweries along the coast. And I think each of these does provide a pretty good opportunity for Newport in general. With fruit and vegetable processing, I think there's definitely an opportunity to process fruits that are imported from places like Mexico, but also to use locally grown products as well to kind of support more local people. For grain and oilseed milling, a lot of those products could be used in things like bakeries or even at the breweries with the barley. And then commercial fishing is, like I said, a really big part of the economy here. So having more infrastructure to process that would be good. Okay, so the last industry that I looked at is metal fabrication. So metal fabrication is basically turning kind of like very preliminary like minerals into products like sheet metal, which is done through casting and all these kinds of processes to refine them. And then after that, metal fabrication basically turns them into all these things that we use every day. So you can turn metals into structural pieces, you can turn them into tools, you can turn them into machinery. It's a really, really big industry. And it supports a lot of other industries as well. So the major downstream consumers of fabricated metal products are construction, motor vehicle manufacturing companies, and then machinery manufacturing. And as you can see, those are some of Oregon's main manufactured exports as well. In terms of its industry growth, you will see there was a peak in 2019, and it really hasn't come up to that level or really come close. So it does seem like it was going away, but the employment projection does show growth in not only fabricated metal manufacturing, but also the supporting industries as well. Another interesting thing about this is the wages are a lot higher than the other industries I looked at. All of these are above the cost of living calculation that I found. So this would be a good way of bringing in good living wage jobs here. And they also don't require a ton of specialty education. But like I said, the other two industries, just like this one, very automated. It takes kind of that knowledge of using those machines. But one really cool thing is that the Oregon Coast Community College here actually has a welding program that they just started. And they're actually partnered with the Port of Toledo to do welding training there. So I thought that could be a really good opportunity to have people trained there, get the skills that they need to come and work at the facility that would be here in Newport. This one, unfortunately, does not really check the box in terms of environmental sustainability. There's a lot of waste that's created, a lot of emissions. They're used in the mining process. And then in terms of processing, it does create a lot of waste as well and use a lot of energy. But there's the opportunity to kind of recycle old metals, but like I said, not quite as sustainable as the other ones. So I guess the big conclusion of this project is that all these industries have their pros, they have their cons. You're never really going to find something that's perfect and checks all of the boxes. That being said, I do think all of these present really good opportunities for the port to create living wage jobs here and just support the local economy. So that's all I have, but I do want to do some acknowledgments. I want to say thank you to my mentor, Erin Bretz at the Port of Newport, as well as Cynthia from MACO, all the MACO staff. I also want to thank you to Seabird Scientific for supporting all of the MACO interns, and then the people at Business Oregon, the College of Forestry, and then the Department of Forestry that I had conversations with for my project. But if you have any questions, I'll take those. And if you want to see my references, I have a QR code over there. So, yeah.